Yeah, I think I want to follow up because I'm interested, this idea of cohesion domestically, the soft power functions of cohesion, it makes me think very much about the nationalist politics of state legitimation. So since we started by talking about Xi Jinping's speech, his promise of a 中国梦, a China dream, it's about making China strong again. But it's also about this idea of somehow restoring China to its proper place at the top of the hierarchy of international society, which, by invoking the idea of hierarchy, you're getting on questions of status, which of course are by definition zero-sum, right? And that's in a way why nationalism is so dangerous. There can only be one number one, but regardless of what your position in status issues, they need to be confirmed, right? So essentially, there's this demand for status, but it's so closely tied up with domestic issues, as he puts it, the language of cohesion might be another way of sort of indirectly talking about the CCP's claim under Xi Jinping that the reason the Chinese people should allow them to govern is because he's going to make China not just strong, but respected again. And so the international audience actually becomes a very central player in domestic regime legitimation. So the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think it's a very interesting, insightful analysis of thinking about this concept also of China dream as being multifaceted, that it's not just about kind of domestic governance or economic growth. It's also about this external, a notion of, respect and rising up as being at the very top. I think there's no explicit mention, at least from what I read, that China should be number one per se, but it should be amongst the top. So it's kind of it's up there when it comes to the first layer, whatever we consider to be 大国关系, like in the big country, major country diplomacy. And it's also interesting when you look at diplomatic speeches of high-ranking officials, when they kind of distill different layers of, of concern or ambition when it comes to China's diplomacy. The big country diplomacy or major country diplomacy is always the first layer. It's kind of consistently the first layer, and that includes the United States, Russia, and the European Union. That's kind of those three. Countries in one region are kind of, two countries in one region are listed first, and sometimes Russia is put first, sometimes the US is put first, but there's this obsession with being in that kind of, the top body, and then the regional diplomacy, and then global south. So that alone kind of tells you kind of where the priorities sort of lie when it comes to these visions. But I think it is challenging in terms of this external validation, and the China dream is having this second layer of, being respected and so forth. And one interesting data point, I think recently there was a survey carried out. One of them was, I think it might have been Global Times, one of the official papers, how Chinese public sees China's kind of stance and how favorable is China in the world. And I remember that from that survey, there was quite a bit of confidence amongst Chinese public that actually China is viewed pretty favorably, like its image has improved a lot. And that doesn't really correspond to the reality from what we see in the polls, at least in the West, it actually has declined. So that also makes me wonder, is external validation really that significant when it comes to like genuine validation, or like the actual respect and looking at the data, the polls, and really kind of understanding how people in other countries view you? Or is it more about how you communicate that message to the public and find ways to communicate it? And one of the ways in which it has been communicated is through very skillful propaganda tactics of delegating propaganda to foreigners and all kinds of experts that often are European or American, that say nice things about China or validate how China is performing in various sectors, and that message is being transmitted over to Chinese publics. So you kind of wonder, how much is Chinese public really getting sort of the news that actually the favorability has gone down? Because I think most Chinese who travel would say, yeah, of course, I'm aware that, there's all kinds of tensions and frictions and misunderstandings. But then somebody living in China who's not traveling might actually be very confident about China's stature. So that was kind of a curious point that I've come across recently in terms of the disconnect between the reality and what's being communicated domestically.